we're picking up some ground fire down there, it looks like. I'm going to have to change my run-in heading. I'll still turn left here and keep clear of you.
During the Tet Offensive of 1968, the North Vietnamese Army had staged through the Shau Valley an entire division and other VC forces for its massive attacks on Hue and Da Nang. Those attacks were a moral victory for the North, but militarily, they were a disaster. In the battle for Hue alone, the NVA lost over 5,000 men. By early 1969, it was becoming apparent to the MAC-V, Military Assistance Command Vietnam, and 24 Corps staffs that Shau Valley was once again an area of high NVA activity. Logistically and strategically, the valley was an important terminus for the Ho Chi Minh Trail. The third of the 187th's battle for Dong Nai and the discovery of mammoth supply depots in the area served to accentuate that point. In May of 1969, the American command planned to clear out the Shau Valley using 10 battalions of infantry, including the 9th Marine Regiment, the 3rd ARVN Regiment, the 3rd of the 5th Cavalry, and 3 air assault battalions, 1st of the 506th, 2nd of the 501st, and 3rd of the 187th. The overall plan of attack called for the Marines and the 3rd of the 5th Cavalry to combat assault into the valley and RIF, reconnaissance in force, toward the Laotian border, while the ARVN units cut the highway through the base of the valley. The 501st and the 506th mission were to destroy the enemy in their own operating areas and block escape routes into Laos. On May 10th, the 3rd Battalion, 187th Regiment of the 101st, known since World War II as the Rockansas, began their attempt to clear out and capture Op Bai Mountain, where the 29th Regiment of the NVA was entrenched in bunkers and supplied from NVA elements operating in Laos, less than a mile away. The terrain in the area favored the defenders. The mountains they were to defend and their ridges were along the Trung Pham River on the Laotian border. The area was covered with a tropical double and triple canopied jungle. The land beneath the trees was a tangled mass of sawtoothed elephant grass, thick stands of bamboo, and other tough vines that inhibited foot movement, even without an enemy presence. The hills gave way to ridgelines, cut with deep ravines, saddles, draws, and smaller hills. It was an area long occupied by the NVA and fortified with bunkers, spider holes, deep tunnels, trenches, and underground shelters for aid stations, command posts, and storage depots. And this time, the NVA intended to stay their ground. Firebase Blaze was 20 kilos south of Op Bai Mountain. In the early morning hours, 1,800 men from 5 battalions, 1st of the 506th, 2nd of the 501st, and 3rd of the 187th from the 101st Airborne Division, and 4th of the 1st and 2nd of the 1st ARVN were assembled there to await liftoff. In the pre-dawn hours, the troops lounged about the area, cleaning weapons, napping, smoking, talking, and wiping off sweat from the early morning heat. Pilots and door gunners stood by some of the Hueys that would air assault the troops into the battle area. The men were poised to launch the largest air mobile assault in the Vietnam War. 10 artillery batteries were laid and ready to fire from fire bases Bradley, Airborne, Currahee, Berchtesgaden, and Cannon, having been moved into their firing positions only 16 hours before the invasion. H hour was 0730. In the hour before the helicopter launch, fighter bombers had bombed the LZs for 50 minutes. The artillery followed with a 15-minute run. Then came aerial rocket artillery helicopters for a 1-minute frosting on the Cape. The troops could hear their bombs blasting the enemy defenses and, they hoped, cutting down their losses later. At 0649, the TAC air prep stopped, and the troops prepared to saddle up. The lift helicopters, UH-1Ds, began to arrive at Firebase Blaze in groups of 16 for a total of 64. At 0730 H hour, the 64 Hueys and the first 400 men and the lead companies of the 1st of the 506th and 3rd of the 187th, covered by Cobra gunships, were on their way to the northern Shau Valley. The Hueys flew to the south, across the Shau Valley, and then, using the walls of the valley as a screen, turned to the north along the Laotian border to their LZs. By 0800, D Company, then A and C, landed on LZ-2 without opposition. 10 minutes later, the troops were moving toward their assigned locations and setting up defensive positions. As planned, Captain Dean L. Johnson and his C Company secured the LZ. Captain Gerald R. Harkins and his A Company moved out toward the Laotian border. Captain Luther L. Sanders led his D Company to the south-southwest, passed through the Battalion CP on LZ-2, and headed up the ridge, protruding to the northwest of Dong Ap Bai. At 0945, Colonel Honeycutt and his command ship landed on LZ-2. Honeycutt relieved Captain Dean Johnson of LZ security, and Johnson and C Company moved out toward the border. Then Honeycutt and part of his staff began to move up the mountain ridge behind D Company, and at about 1100 linked up with Sanders about 1,000 meters from the top of the mountain. Helicopters hovering slowly overhead reported enemy trails, campsites, supply dumps, and bunkers. The signs of the enemy were becoming ominous. Honeycutt began to sense the enemy around him and radioed Colonel Conmee to release B Company to him. Conmee readily agreed, and B Company arrived at LZ-2 about 1430. Captain Charles L. Littman, who had taken over from Captain Robinson on May 8th and would command the company for only 12 days, commanded B Company. At about 1530, B Company reached Honeycutt's Battalion CP. Honeycutt ordered Littman to move his company up the mountain. Colonel Curtin remembered seeing the mountain for the first time.
One of the things was the high ground. We needed to get a look on the high ground, and so I went out there one day. It was a mission of taking a look at this hill. I think it was about 314, which meant meters above sea level, and we got shot at, and I put some infantry on the ground, and one thing led to another, and the kids got into a pretty tight fight.
After reaching the uppermost portion of the ridge, the company moved several hundred meters to the northeast and then proceeded south along a second ridge. As the company moved, the enemy's presence could be felt. Lookout towers high in the burrows of the canopy were passed. Joint sections of bamboo, freshly cut for their water content, were strewn about. Spider holes and punji pits were encountered. B Company moved slowly, hoping to make the summit before dusk. The sound of artillery impacting on the hill, the ridges, and in the valleys and ravines was pleasing to the ear. The faint ping of mortar fire coming from the Battalion CP at D Company's location was reassuring. Suddenly, a round whined overhead, then another. Contact! Small arms fire began to pour in. The second platoon, led by Lieutenant Marshal Edwards, dispersed and returned fire. The bushes, the trees, the jagged rocks all seemed steeped with the violence of armed combat. The smell of cordite hung low over the anxious troops. Artillery was just within 25 meters of the platoon, with shrapnel falling into friendly positions. The firing subsided, then flared again as the Rakansans moved forward. When more heavy explosives were poured onto the enemy positions, the fire lessened and then stopped. Sweep teams found 4 enemy bodies and 4 AK-47s. Artillery pounded the area throughout the night. Honeycutt ordered Littman to dig in and establish